Ashwin Acharya. Thanks for coming on, brother.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. We met about 7 months ago, I think. It was about when I first started coming to church,
Yeah.
about September.
Yeah.
And
Time's
through Matty,
flying.
yes, definitely. And through Matty Martin,
Mm-hmm.
we want to get quite close to you now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you've been a massive mentor in my life, especially through Christianity, brother.
Right.
It's been an awesome journey.
Good. Well, I'm deeply honoured, so thanks for the pleasure.
Yeah, no worries. Where the journey start for you?
So I'm 32. I'll be 33 in October. In terms of faith journey, my family grew up Christian for as long as I can remember. That was the norm. The day would be patterned with prayer. As a Catholic family, having grown up, I saw families who were way more hardcore Catholic than us. It's not like we were pumping out, 20 decades of the Rosary or something like that. And some families who are really rhythmed in the Catholic life and the Catholic piety, that would be their formation. But that wasn't my formation as a kid. Very simply, for as long as I can remember, we were a praying family, and we'd get up and the day would begin in mum and dad's bedroom at the foot of their bed, and we'd read a psalm, and then we'd pray the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. And if it was a special occasion, Dad would pray some kind of a spontaneous prayer for a birthday or an anniversary or a big event that's happening or a big milestone or something. And that was the morning. Like, the day didn't start until that happened. It was as commonplace as, go brush your teeth. We're going to have breakfast. We'd hold hands and say grace before meals. We'd obviously go to Sunday Mass. That was it was so normal that it was as normal as the sun rising. It's like, hey, are we going to Mass this weekend? It's not a question. And then the day would end similar to the way it began, but in my bedroom, because I was the youngest of two. My brother's 4 years my senior. So the day would end at my bed, and we'd pray a kind of rehearsed prayer, and then I'd just roll into bed and everyone else would go to sleep. So for the longest time, I just thought that's normal. That's what a family does. That's like normal family stuff. And when I had friends who'd sleep over, they would just do it. So nothing, no alarm bells kind of rang. It's like it didn't seem odd with an outsider, When it seemed odd was when I slept over at their place, and it's like, hey, when are we going to say grace? I'm ready. And we'd just be chowing down. So then I thought, well, maybe it's a cultural thing. Like, maybe this is the Indian household. But then, lo and behold, there'd be other families, Filipino, what have you, other cultures who would have like a deeper sort of natural, enculturated way of expressing their faith. So, that's me making sense of how we lived out our faith in the first, say, 10 to 15 years of my life, where I'd be observing our own internal house behavior and then comparing it with people who I grew up with and who I loved, and they may or may not have been of faith, but faith is an interesting thing. And I think it's impossible for faith not to be enculturated. Like, it hits the ground somewhere amidst someone's, and then it starts to kind of take on their flesh, which is that is Christianity, Christmas, the incarnation. God comes and claims flesh for his own. And then you watch him and he's like, oh, okay, he's Hebrew. And yet God is not Hebrew, you know what I mean? But it can't not take flesh. It can't not be expressed in a language. Anyway, sorry, we've already taken a big detour. But so for me, the Catholic life was a normal life. That being said, Dad is not a Catholic. So I think we also had a sense that the church is broader. It kind of pours out the doors of the Catholic Church, and there's a bigger world there where unity is still found, amidst the broader Christian family, because there's only one Christian baptism. So if you're a Presbyterian, if you're a Lutheran, if you're uniting, if you're if you have no label but you're a Bible-believing Christian and you've sort of ritualized that in some respect, like, we went out to Fitzroy and got baptized. Well, as long as it's in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, it's as valid as any baptism. All of that was sort of implicit in my childhood.
Yep. When you were growing older, like, did you go to a Catholic school growing up
Yeah,
as well?
yeah.
Yep.
So I grew up in Yeppoon. We lived just across the road from Sacred Heart School.
Yep.
Where I did the majority of my primary education. Mum taught there. She still teaches there, actually. In year 7, she taught at St. Anthony's in Rockhampton, where I'll be moving for my new appointment. Holy Family Church is connected to St. Anthony's. So I did year 7 there. Then I came back to St. Brendan's College in Yeppoon. And then I went to CQU in Rocky to study teaching. But yeah, that first primary and tertiary education was through Catholic education.
I'm not sure what it was like back you going to Catholic schools, but for today, I know my own experience, a lot of families that do go to Catholic schools actually aren't Catholic, especially in Gladstone, because like there's only one private school and families just like to send their children there because it's a lot more secure and in their eyes, a lot more safe, you would say, than public schools.
It's a very good observation. So that's a mixed bag, and I want to say this cautiously and respectfully. I think, you know how I said religion is always enculturated. So with 0 ounce of condemnation, because I'm Australian, so I'm not like commenting on Australian culture from without. I'm commenting as an Aussie. The Australian culture is not the most religious culture out there. No. You know, its pious language is really at a minimum. Our most pious celebrations as a nation are like Anzac Day, which is coming up. Like I think the average Aussie would be happy for that to be drenched in sort of religious connotations, even if they're not religious people. It's like, yeah, okay, but sacrifice, I get that, and it connects to something religious. But in terms of, you know, like go to India or the Philippines or South America or Latin America, and you've got these big or Poland, you've got these big processions, you know, these big public displays of enculturated faith. And that's not Australia. It might be little hubs in Australia, like, you know, go to Melbourne and get into the swing of their cathedral life. And they've got like Corpus Christi processions and stuff. We had a Corpus Christi procession here in Gladstone, which is when the Blessed Sacrament, the Eucharist, is exposed. You know how we have adoration on a Wednesday morning, for example?
Yes.
The Blessed Sacrament is exposed in this ornate case called a monstrance, and then the priest or the deacon or the bishop or whoever's there puts on a certain kind of liturgical vestment and like processes it literally out into the public. So he'll walk, let's say this is the church, he'll kind of walk out the church, go out into the middle of the city and come back to the church. And the society's like, what's going on here? Like something's happening. It's a public display of our faith that the Eucharist is the real presence of Jesus. And if that's Jesus, then that's the King of the universe, you know, just doing a little roundabout trip in Gladstone, which is, so that's part of the pious imagination of cultures. And that kind of thing happens in big dramatic ways in these other countries where they're happy to express their religion in really festive sort of public, you know, pulling out all the stops kind of ways. But Australia's just not that kind of culture, I suppose. Not in those ways.
Well, why is that? Because we did come from the British Empire.
Yeah.
I don't know where along the line has, I guess you could say, Australians became more atheists in high numbers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the yeast of Catholicity in Australia is the Irish Church. A lot of our missionaries and a lot of our priests, even until recent times, were from Ireland. So what does Irish piety look like? To be honest, I don't know. Like they've got a beautiful, rich, old, ancient spirituality and tradition, but it's a particular flavor of being Catholic. And, you know, I guess sadly, Ireland itself is going through a kind of crisis of faith. You know, their churches are quite, I don't know, ill-attended compared to generations gone by. And even their convictions are straying from what would be considered, Now that's a big, like I'm tarring the whole nation with a broad brush, so obviously there's very faithful, very orthodox Catholics to be found everywhere. But culture is quite a fluid thing, and it's like culture shapes us, but we also shape it, which is scary. It's like, what kind of culture do I want to live in and why? And not just the outward appearance of the culture, but like really what's a good soil for a young man or a young woman or a family or an elderly couple or, you know, a widow. What cultures, we're straying into a totally different topic here, but it's like if we had the ability to intercept and be like, no, we want our culture to enshrine this as important and to keep this safe and to, you know, stay away from that and put fences around this without being too rigid or oppressive about it.
Do you think with the influence of social media these days and also science coming along and trying to almost like remove religion, try to distinguish like the idea that God created the world and it was just science, do you think that's a massive impact on why people are moving away from religion?
So I was speaking to some of the staff at one of the schools yesterday, and I was talking about how we do live in a skeptical age, which isn't the worst thing in the world. I think it's good to be skeptical at a healthy level. You know, you should be skeptical of everything, obviously. It like the root word is your eyes. So yeah, you should look at stuff like properly. And the church even says you shouldn't be credulous, which means just believing things with no reason to believe them. So if I'm scrolling on Facebook and I see, you know, hey, yesterday in Gladstone, Jesus appeared on someone's piece of toast, you know, burnt the toast perfectly in his image. It's like no one is obliged to believe that. We're right to be skeptical of it. But you remember that scene in the Gospels with Thomas, the famous doubter, and the disciples are in the upper room and Jesus appears and Thomas isn't there. And they tell him later, and he says, unless I can put my hand in the holes in his hands, my finger in his hand, and my hand in his side, I refuse to believe. Like, I will not be credulous to your testimony for whatever reason, you know. So he had to experience the risen Lord himself to come to believe. And he says, my Lord, my God, like he makes the most radical profession of faith thereafter. So anyway, sorry, being skeptical is good. Being credulous is not good. It's not good and faithful to just believe every single thing without thinking. Faith and reason are always meant to go hand in hand. They sort of are two halves of the same whole. So why is our culture so radically skeptical? Like, why does it topple off the edge of skepticism? I think there's many reasons for that. I would say that people have, like, there's almost a rebellion that I notice in people. It's quite an immature, you know, it's like the rebellion of a teenager. Like, oh, my parents say I should clean my room. I'm not doing that. Yep. It's like, so wait, why aren't you doing it? Like, why don't you want a clean room? In a sense, I pick up that vibe of rebellion against just organizations in general, whether it be the government or organized religion or, you know, authority figures. And it's like, okay, well, if there's like this phobia of authority bubbling up in people's hearts, that needs to be dealt with, and chucking religion out the window isn't going to solve the problem. There's going to be another authority that offends you. We need to be under authority. I think it was Teresa of Avila who said, he who is his own master is the disciple of a fool. And, you know, it's the whole like blind leading the blind thing. It's like, no, I'm a small piece in this grand thing, and I need mentors and superiors and elders to go before me, and I need a bit of a team to bolster me, and I need to lend myself to them. No man is an island, you know, it's all. So I wonder whether, you know, secular Australia, because Australian culture will bang on about like camaraderie and community and helping your mate, and that's like very Australian. So I wonder why that doesn't connect to the basic premise of coming together in faith. It's like, why is that not camaraderie? Is it that institute has scandalized or offended you, which it has? I mean, the church is accountable to both its virtue and its sin. And I think when the church sins, it really ruptures its own credibility. You know, people become credulous to what should be the good normal witness of the church. But it's like, oh well, you know, the church has got its skeletons. So it's like, okay, I don't know. In a way, I empathize with people's skepticism, but I just want to say, I think we've forgotten what religion is. You know, people say, I'm not religious. It's like, what do you mean? In the same way that it's impossible, like you have an accent, right? I have an accent, and we might not necessarily pick it up because we're both Aussie, but that doesn't mean we don't have one. You have a culture. I have a culture. I would argue that every single person everywhere has a religion, because religion comes under the banner of virtue, of justice. Yeah. So imagine someone saying, "Oh, I don't believe in justice. I don't think we should be just." It's like a nonsense statement. So it's like, okay, you think society should be just, and you as an individual should be just. Cool. What's justice? Justice is affording to each one their due. That's like the basic definition of justice. Everyone is owed something. Even the beggar who lives in the gutter is owed, like he has an inalienable human dignity. So when he's starving to death, and we have a society of like abundance stuff's going to waste, justice demands that we find a way to feed that guy. And the same goes for every single person everywhere. Now, if I am willing to concede, because a lot of people who say I'm not religious, they're like, oh, but I'm spiritual. You know, I believe there's a God. It's like, okay, is that God just like an inanimate force like electricity? Or is that God somehow personal? Like, is that God a person? Can that God be interacted with? Can you appeal to that God as I would appeal to a friend? And if the answer is even vaguely yes, then justice extends to that God as well. It's like, if justice is rendering to each one their due, then what is God due? That's the work of religion. Religion attempts to render to God God's due. And then it's like, oh, well, what is God due? God is due everything, right? Religion, when it's done properly, is an attempt to render unto God everything. All that I have, all that I am, my past, my present, my future, everything. So religion better be pretty sophisticated, because spirituality on its own can't do that. Nor does it want to do that. Spirituality doesn't care about justice per se. Justice is far too organized an endeavor. You know what I mean?
I do have one opinion that I've been thinking of quite lately, especially with the rise of crime, and it's all over the news, and just the violence worldwide at the moment. In my point of view, or my opinion, is that's because a lot of people are losing faith in God. They don't so much fear sinning anymore. Yeah. Because they don't believe there is a higher power, that when there's wrong, there'll be a consequence for it. They feel like they can just get away with it. And that's starting from the parents. It's then getting passed down to the children. And that's why we're seeing children crime very often lately. It's just,
no accountability.
Increasing. Yes, it's going crazy at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you believe religion may be partially the solution?
Yeah, but here's the sad part. So religion at its best, yes. But, flip through the Gospels or even flip through the Old Testament and look at the condemnations that God brings against religious folk, right? Religion is one of those things. So any system can be abused, right? And if I want to, I was praying on this just this morning. So there's this line, I think it's in Matthew 5. No, it might be later in Matthew, but it's in Matthew's gospel. And Jesus has really given the Pharisees a bit of a hard time because the Pharisees were attempting to be the epitome of religious life. You know, they want to be seen, they want to witness, they want to preserve what it is to be Jewish with the texts and the ritual life and everything. So in a big way, we sort of give Pharisees a hard rap nowadays. We say, "Oh, you're being a Pharisee," but it's like we have scripture partially thanks to the Pharisees. Like they did preserve stuff. Were they sometimes hypocrites? Yeah. Cool. Don't be a hypocrite, but don't just chuck out Pharisees as a kind of person. Just like Samaritans, we've made this Samaritan mean something that it doesn't really mean. But anyway, okay. So Jesus is giving the Pharisees a bit of a hard time. He's calling out the hypocrisy. And at one point he says, you lay heavy burdens on people's shoulders and you do nothing to help them. And then he says, I've lost, it's kind of a big thing that he said, so I wish I could reference where it is. But at one point he says, you have constructed like men's rules, which you honor, to get out of doing the basic stuff. And one example he gives is so one of the commandments is honor your mother and father, right? So when my mum and dad are old and frail, justice once again demands that I am concerned for them and I provide for them because they've provided for me my entire life. Now that's not a religious conviction. That's like a basic human thing. But Jesus says you get out of honoring that command by saying, oh, all my inheritance is now korban, which means I'm going to give it to the temple. I'm going to do something godly with it. I'm going to do something really righteous with it. Sorry, mum and dad, I got no money now. I gave it all to the temple. And Jesus is like, do you think I don't know what you're doing? Like God, who's closer to us than we are to ourselves. It's like you are not trying to make an extravagant gift to God. You're trying to get out of needing to care for your parents. You expect me to reward that or even condone it? So, and it's like they're doing a religious thing to escape a far more primal duty. Does that make sense? Mm. So I think you ask, is religion going to fix the problem? It's like it could if we didn't use religion as a smokescreen. But the human heart is so devious that what do you do, try and make the best cultures you can, be really genuine about it, be really determined, don't lose hope. In terms of religion, which is a culture as well, try and be as authentic and thorough and, try to run it to its extremity, test it, examine yourself. Why am I doing this? Are my intentions good? And if they're not, and then it's so easy, we just discover deeper and deeper layers of how devious we are. I know it in my prayer life. The reason I said I was thinking about it today was because I had a bit of a slack morning, and so it was a bit of a wasteful morning, and I had one engagement over here that I forewent. And then I thought, I got to get to the office and I need to get into some work, but I haven't said my prayers. So I'm like, my time is korban, it belongs to God now. See what I mean? It's like, yeah, but you should have prayed earlier because now you've got other work to do. And that's me doing a religious thing, but it's like, it's not the holiest thing, or it doesn't have the most integrity to it. Mm.
Whenabouts did you decide you wanted to become a priest in your life?
Quite late. So grew up in Yeppoon, loved community from the beginning, had a really beautiful, nurturing family and friends. And so I'd get involved with community stuff, but I didn't have any sense of what I wanted to do. And the church was just part of that, home, community, church. That's like the orbit, and they all overlap. So the church very much felt like another room in the house. You know, we lived quite, especially in our house, in our current house in Yeppoon is just down the hill from the church.
That's definitely how I feel now when I go in the church.
That's awesome.
It's just like the second home now.
That's how it should feel too.
When I first started going, I felt quite vulnerable for some reason. I almost felt like an intruder when I was first walking to the church.
Yep.
Like, oh, is everyone looking at me? Like, who's this guy? And slowly over time, like now it's to the point where I just go twice a week and it feels unnatural not to do so.
That's beautiful. For the record, they were looking at you, but they were very, very proud. Honestly, man, they were so happy to see you there. And you know, I have a tendency to make these long detours when I'm talking, but if churches don't make people feel that way, welcome and proud in the good sense, something's not right. And that's when religion starts to become stagnant. You know, it's like you're claiming this is religion, but it's in principle unjust because people don't want to even be here. New people don't want to be here. And old people are like cordoning it off as if it's private property now, which it just isn't. Anyway, so good for you. And yeah, the church felt like another room in the house, felt like home. Grew up, as you said, went through Catholic education, or as we were talking, went through Catholic, went to St. Brennan's. By the end of St. Brennan's, up until then, I just was inspired by my brother. So anything he liked, I liked. And I would tag along. He did soccer. I'd go and stand on the soccer field and watch the ball go around. Yeah, I'm a soccer player. You know, he's very artistic. And yeah, like I had similar gifts. So I'd be doing art as well. At one point he wanted to be an architect and I thought, yeah, cool. And I even took graphics and stuff, you know. I really followed a lot of his footsteps. But towards the end of high school, I was getting a sense of, no, wait, these are things that I like that he may or may not like, I don't know, but I know I like them and I know I'm going to pursue them. And I guess one of those that I really pushed into was music, even though I started in year 2. I don't remember this actually. I have this like, you know when someone tells you a childhood thing so much that you like fabricate your own memory of it, but it's like, I don't actually remember that. I have a memory of when I was young, maybe 5, and so my parents tell me I was harmonizing, whistling with the radio, right? So the radio is just playing and I'm busy whistling this harmony over the top of it. And they're like, he needs to do music. So they started me in piano in year 2. And so I carried that with me through my childhood and into my adulthood now. So music I pressed into in high school. You know, my brother did drums and he liked music, but he didn't push into music in the same way. Then kickboxing, and I trained at Yeppoon Fight Centre. And that was the realization of a long fantasy or fascination with like Mortal Kombat and these old school fighting games and, you know, Street Fighter, the movie, and
Fight Club,
Bruce Lee, that kind of stuff, you know. It just captured my mind. And my dad was a boxer. He boxed in the Indian Air Force. So he was happy to see that interest and he supported it with both of us. So I went into Muay Thai. I pushed into that in high school. And then my mum was and is a teacher. And when I saw, like, what caught me most about teaching, because I loved community and I intended to use music and boxing in this way as well, and it's how Maddie uses boxing, really, Muay Thai, for the community, is I saw my mum, like, we'd be going shopping and she'd been teaching for, 15 years or something. And little kids would run up and say, hey, Mrs. Acharya. And she'd say hello, you know, they'd be in her class. And then some bigger kids and even adults would say, hey, Mrs. Acharya, how you going? And it's like, she's had a huge ripple effect on this community. Your mum's a teacher, isn't she?
Yes.
Yeah. So you would have seen it yourself. It's like, that's a big impact. That's a real privileged place to be. Long game. It's like, it's not one event and then, whew, hope I did the culture good. It's like, I'm going to slog away at this for 50 years or 60 years. That really caught me. I thought, yeah, I'd be keen to be a teacher. And I think I've got gifts that might do well there. But so as you can see, the priesthood was just not on my radar at all. I really took it for granted. In fact, it didn't even cross my mind. Hey, how did Father Brian become a priest? What was he before he was a priest? My priest, old parish priest in Yeppoon. Those thoughts were not, at least consciously, on my mind at all. It's funny how blank it was, but it was. Here's another funny thing. So before I considered the priesthood explicitly, which was at the age of 22, so quite late, right? I remember having this daydream vision thing of me doing a martial arts kata type thing in an alb, that white liturgical dress I wear, in the church, and the church is empty, and I'm just busy meditating like a Catholic monk, like a weird mixture of a Shaolin monk and a Catholic priest. And I'm like, oh, that's a weird. And that was I was young, but the fact that just flitted past my mind and then kind of made an impression and left. It's almost in retrospect, I think God was stirring in me a love for the church, and not necessarily a love for the priesthood, because it's not oh yeah, that's my career. I really want to do that as my job. That's still not how I feel about the priesthood. It's I love the church in its million extensions. Its art, its history, its intellectual tradition, the people and their many variabilities. The church has my heart. There's no question there. And it's out of that kind of almost, I hesitate to say, romantic fascination, captivation. It's out of that later the priesthood was kind of a no-brainer. But before that, it was not on my mind at all. Yeah. So coming to the end of high school, I sort of thought, I like music, but I don't want to be a professional musician. If it takes off, that'd be cool. I like boxing, but I'm clearly not going to be a professional fighter. I'll just use it to coach and, create community and do men's events and stuff. I like teaching, and I think I'm going to be embedded in the school setting. I like my church. I think I'm going to be embedded there. That was me in the last years of high school. And that was me sailing into adulthood as well, out of high school. And for a good 2 years, it sort of ran, that worked. But none of those, including teaching, none of those quite hit fertile soil and became clear career pathways for the future. And again, I assumed, even though I didn't necessarily have any serious girlfriends, I assumed I'd get married, I'd just be an active layperson in the church, I'd be teaching, maybe my wife would be a teacher. I just kind of assumed these things. But none of them took off with any great sturdiness. None were very stable. So I'd do music for fun, and I'm going to do a gig later in a couple of weeks over here. Same kind of thing. Some of these things have kept rolling as they originally were, but others have ended. Obviously I'm not a teacher anymore. So when teaching as the main thing didn't quite manifest, I was left at the end of my rope, twiddling my thumbs, making myself busy in the community with those other gifts I mentioned, and doing some relief teaching and stuff. But it was clear that it was a transitional time. It's well, this can't be it, because this isn't really anything. And then there was in the parish bulletin, there happened to be a campus ministry advertisement for one of the local Catholic high schools, St. Ursula's College. And I went there and I applied, and I got that. And the principal at the time, Catherine Dunbar, she said, "Ashwin, you're a qualified teacher." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Campus ministry is only a part-time gig." I said, "Okay." She said, "Do you want to teach?" I said, "Yeah, all right." And so there was a lady going on maternity leave, and I took her class. And that, even once it landed there, and I finally had this real moment of grace, thanks to Catherine and that community, experienced a great welcome there. I was a St. Brennan's boy, so there was already this working relationship with the college. It it kind of ran its course quickly and just wrapped up. And I'm there giving more and more of my time to the campus ministry and less to the teaching. And I think I fell in love with that. But even that I knew is not a career. Like some people were saying, oh, maybe he's called to be a campus minister. Still, like the priesthood was just not, at least not on my mind. I'm telling this story such a long way, but eventually in the role of campus minister, there was a youth retreat, which happened for year 10s and year 11s. And this guy named Christian Nobleza would come and run it. And now someone else runs it. I can't remember who. But it's called ACTS, ACTS. The year 10 one was a chance to share, and the year 11 one was a chance to serve. And it was about like, what are your gifts? What's your personality? What does the community need? How can you lend yourself to community? How can you be a person of prayer, to do it authentically, all of that. So I'm there as a supervisor. The retreat's not for me, right? But I'm there. I'm at the back of the room. The kids are all there, Christians, talking to them. And the first time he came and the first time I met him, he said, hey, my name's Christian. I work for a group called Marist Youth. And this is a Marist parish, so it's a religious order within the church. And Marist Youth put on events like this, and did formation for young people. And I saw Christian, who was probably in his late 30s, and I thought, what a cool guy. Like, I've never met anyone like that in Yeppoon. Yeppoon's small kind of place. And I certainly knew the smaller church there, and I just never met someone like him. And I thought, what a lovely guy. I'd love to stay connected with him. Next year he comes back and he says, hey kids, I'm at the back of the room. He says, hey kids, last time you saw me, I was working for Marist Youth. Now I work for a group called Vocation Brisbane, and I help young people, and especially young men, discern whether God is calling them to the priesthood. And I'm like, that's a weird job, man. Do you have any customers? And like hearing that made me itchy. I'm like, what? It's the first time I explicitly considered it. And now I've gotten into my vocation story. I've told this story a lot of times, but I said something to him that was a weird thing to say because it wasn't exactly true. I went up to him in the break and I said, Christian, I've always thought about this, but I've never done anything about it. And he laughed and said, maybe it's time you did something about it. I'll introduce you to Father Morgan Batt, who was the Brizzy Vocations Director. And so I discerned through Brisbane. But that very phrase, I've always thought about this, was weird because I'd never consciously thought about it. But all I can say is, I guess in faith, something was brewing subconsciously for like a long time, and it was maturing. And so when I finally thought about the priesthood explicitly, within 4 months I went from nothing to going to the seminary, which is a quick discernment. That's a quick time frame to make such a big decision as, yep, I'll give my life to the priesthood. Now I will say that, obviously people fall in love like that and they get married after 4 months. So it's not the strangest thing in the world. And also I will say that I said yes and have never regretted it. And I don't think it was a premature yes. I think it was a real yes. But that yes has had to be depthed as I've gone on. Like every day it now seems to me I have to say yes to being called to the priesthood because this isn't a career and I'm not doing it under sufferance. I'm called and I'm responding. And at times, there's not much in the tank, but it's like, well, God, are you still calling me? Yeah, you are. And also I've solemnly promised to now walk this journey.
So becoming a priest, what's the process do you have to take? And how long is that process until you're officially a priest?
Okay, so the first thing would be you would need the endorsement of your bishop, right? Because why do I have permission to do anything at all as a priest? Because I'm operating with the permission of my bishop, who's given me faculties to do this. So you can't just like apply somewhere and then get accepted or something. I guess in a sense you do get accepted, but a person would have a sense of maybe God is calling me to that. Now I need to go and consult the church and walk with the church. And so your first protocol would be a parish priest, and your parish priest would connect you with what's called the vocations director, who is a person in the diocese who's responsible for promoting vocations and companioning young people with vocations. And in our diocese, we have, I don't know if Father Matthew Maloney is still something officially he was once the director, but now like he's got clergy life and ministry stuff, among many other things. Everyone in our diocese wears like 12 hats. So they've all got lots of jobs. But we have a layman named Michael Otto, who's based in Rocky. And he's the director. He's got like a threefold thing of vocations, youth, and families. I think that's his job, director of that. So if you're in the Diocese of Rockhampton, anywhere to Longreach, to Mackay, to Bundaberg, and out on the coast, if you're anywhere within there, you would eventually be connected to Michael Otto, Mick, and he would companion you with another group, like with the whole group of people who are thinking. And over the course of a year or 2 years or however long it takes, just like RCIA, it's not like 8 months and then you get baptized. No, as long as you need, and then you get baptized. It's about readiness, two-way discerned, and that's really important. It's a two-way thing. So if a person just insists until the cows come home, yeah, God's calling me to the priesthood, and like his parish priest is like, I don't know, like, he's a bit wacky, and the people have got to like, yeah, nah, he's never here, like he's got his own agenda going on. That is not going to go very far, because in the same way that you can't just insist to some lady, hey, I'm going to marry you. She's like, who are you? I don't know you. Yeah. Like, can we get to know each other first? And then can I maybe develop feelings for you? Because I don't know who you are. It's like that with the church and the priesthood. It's amazingly relational.
Have there been occasions where people are quite forceful, like, I'm ready, and they're kind of pushed back, like, no.
Yeah. And so to anchor that in your original question, how long does it take? Let's say the discernment process to enter the seminary could be anywhere from 4 months, like myself. It can be as quick or as short as it could be, but I guess the church, meaning the priest, the community, the bishop, the vocation director, the church, the local church, and the discerner himself would like to be confident that, yeah, okay, I think we know what we're signing up for, so let's give it a crack. And then the person would undergo the necessary medical stuff and psychiatric stuff, so he's a healthy, fella, physically and mentally and whatever. And then basically the bishop would sponsor him to study at the seminary. So at the end of 2014, Bishop Michael accepted my petition or whatever to go to the seminary. And I went to the seminary as his seminarian, which means I'm sponsored by him, so to speak. And I study for him. And then when I finish, I come back to him like I'm his. If I see it through, and that's what happened, right? So the seminary in Queensland is a provincial seminary, because if the Rockhampton diocese had a seminary, they would have had one student, me, for ages, and then they would have had one student earlier than that, which is, like these. I was looking at Father Andrew, but he's actually been a priest for a while now. So it wouldn't have been sensible for Rocky itself to have a seminary. But the provincial seminary is Queensland, the 5 dioceses of Cairns, Townsville, Toowoomba, Rockhampton, and Brisbane. And it's in Brisbane. And if you see the seminary logo, it's a shield with the Holy Spirit coming down and the 5 stars. And the 5 stars are the 5 dioceses. And the Holy Spirit is the Holy Spirit. and it's called Holy Spirit Seminary. So everyone who goes there studies and then goes back to where they came from, including Brisbane. They just stay in Brizzy. Now, my formation at the seminary was 6.5 years, which includes a master's in theology, although I still need my academics is not yet completely finished, a fair while after ordination, which is not the best thing, but anyway, more on that later. So discernment and then the seminary formation, somewhere around 6.5 years, at least in Australia. Now, when some of our missionary guys from Nigeria or India or Vietnam hear that, they're like, oh, I studied for like 15 years. And I guess, remember we were talking about culture, that is culturally conditioned. Like, why does Australia, or why does Queensland at least, have such a short program? Because we need priests urgently. And a lot of our guys are mature vocations. They come in their 40s and stuff sometimes, which means let's try and get to the essentials here, without shortcutting in a way that's like, hurtful to the process, because you do need just the time and space to discern. It's not just about studying for 6 years. It's like, no, there's a lot of pregnant silence in that time for me to sit and think and feel and pray. But in Nigeria, for example, where they've got like 600 seminarians in a town, well, they don't need to just punch them out quick. In fact, it would pay to lengthen the program a bit and to try and put some breakers in there so that people don't just jump through the system, willy-nilly. Because, you can imagine how in some places where there's poverty and there's corruption and there's instability, the priesthood would be an option for like, hey, this might actually give me a stable life. And that's just contextual for different places in the world. That's not the case for Australia. Like, no one's going to come to the priesthood, you would hope. No one's going to come to the priesthood with the intention of a stable living. But in some places, maybe that is the case, which means the process needs to somehow mitigate that. Mm.
Being a priest, what are the major challenges, but also rewards that come with it, or that you have experienced?
We talk about salvation, right? Salvation comes from the Latin salvus, which means health. So the work of the church is the work of salvation. Eternal salvation, yeah, like going to heaven, but also participating with heaven now, like bringing God's kingdom into being now and unfurling it and raising it up and becoming native to it. And I think the priesthood, along with the work of all the baptized, is about bringing salvation and the kingdom of God to bear its fruit. And that kingdom stands athwart other kind of oppressive kingdoms, So while the kingdom of God is a kingdom of peace, it sort of peaceably swings by and crushes stuff that's against humanity, which can seem violent, but really it's just asserting the good and the beautiful and the true. And I put that in the context of all the baptized because it's like we're a priestly people, like when a person is baptized, they're baptized into the priestly, the prophetic, and the kingly office of Jesus. Jesus is priest, prophet, and king. And if you're a baptized person, you're a member of Jesus's body. So you are already functioning as priest, prophet, king. But the ministerial priesthood kind of has a particular part in that. Within the people of God, the ordained priest has a specific role and duty and responsibility within and alongside and for the people of God. So, what is my work and why is it rewarding? My work as a baptized person and amongst the baptized people is to allow God's kingdom to come to its fruition as fully as possible in the particular lives of people. And it's rewarding to see that. And it's rewarding to kind of get buy-in, I guess, from others, like someone's trying to live a good life. They're using the best stuff at their resources, using the best stuff at hand. They're running with whatever scripts their family or their society gave them. And it's like, okay, well, here's some of the game plan of the church. Here's something of what we believe God is doing with us. And when someone's like, that's good, like I'll buy into that, which we literally see, daily. That's super rewarding. Super rewarding.
What are the challenges then? What are the challenges that you have faced?
We're sort of circling around the same themes here, but I'm tempted to say the challenge. So I'm a sinner, right? I got to deal with my own sin and frailty and my own ways of like cheating the system or using the system to just keep sailing at a pretty cruisy pace. And it's like that offends me and myself. And when I see it, I got to address it. And it's just the human heart, so it shouldn't scandalize anyone too much that we do that. People do that. Fine. You would hope that someone who matures in the faith is very keenly aware of that stuff and, brings it to God. What I find challenging is seeing that in myself, obviously, but in the church at large. And like you can tell you want to call people to the fullness of life, but not too abruptly and not with the air of condemnation, like, hey, you should be doing this, But then not just patting them on the back and letting them kind of never quite acquire the gift. It's like God's got this divine gift for us, salvation, the fullness of life. And you don't know what it is until you do know what it is. And lest you look like a fool, you just pretend you have it already. It's like, yeah, I'm really here for the right reasons and yada, yada. And it's like, look, we're on a journey. So let's like come here admitting our frailty, admitting we got work to do. Let's keep our eyes on the prize. Let's try and like raise our appetite for God, because take baptism prep, for example. So this is like young families who bring their kids, and you were mentioning Catholic schools and people are there because there's a bit of a cultural, this is an arc. So it's not said with condemnation, but there'd be, just statistically, there'd be a lot of people who are there largely because, hey, that's a good opportunity for my kid academically and socially. That's good for them. And it's like, yeah, okay, good for you. Like that's, you're providing for your kid. Why would we dismiss that? But the thing is, that's not what the Catholic school is. The Catholic school is like an arm of the church, and the church is about salvation, as we just said, the fullness of life, this gift of God. That line we heard some months ago with Jesus and the woman at the well, and it's like, if you knew the gift of God, you'd be asking me for water. You wouldn't be here trying to cheat the system and skirt through. So it's like, yeah, if we just but knew the gift of God, we would engage with all this stuff so much differently. We'd confess that we've got this infinite divine thirst and nothing is going to satiate it except God himself. It's challenging. It's challenging to try and patiently and hopefully play that game of like everyone may be possibly cheating. Everyone maybe just saying the right thing to make everyone happy, and then, hey, we did our bit, you know what I mean? Now that's a very like intolerant thing to say, because I guess I have this image, and this is a very Pope Francis image of like accompaniment. Pope Francis talks about accompaniment a lot, a church that walks with people, which is absolutely beautiful. We all ought to do that, obviously. And that call mitigates my frustration or my impatience because even I'm not running at the front of the line. So it's like, okay, Ashwin, you know, you're doing what the Pharisees did. You're laying hard burdens on people that you're not carrying yourself. But when you think of the church as a pilgrim people, and you think of, you know, that beautiful Exodus image of Israel coming out of slavery, and then they make this long trek through the desert, and you think of like 5,000 or 10,000 or however many people it was, like by definition, that group is going to have stragglers. It's going to have people who kind of wander off into the desert and come back. It's going to have people charging out the front. It's going to have people kind of like rallying them up. And like the pilgrim people is the mixture of all those different things, right? So I need to remind myself to be at peace with the pilgrim people looking like that. It's like, yeah, this is a group that kind of like swells and sharpens, you know, seasonally almost. But when I see, let's say we're going that way, something the principal of St. John said to me just the other day, I'll finish with, but let's say the group's going that way. It's like when I see more and more kind of straggling at this end and dispersing out the back, that's challenging. That's challenging. And I believe in the providence of God, which means if it's happening, it's okay. Like God's provided for it. God knows it's happening. And God is not careless. You know, this Sunday we're going to hear about God, Jesus, the good shepherd who goes looking for the lost sheep. So it's like, if I'm concerned for that, surely the God of the universe, who is love itself, is far more concerned and far more invested in catering to it. But yeah, like, you know, that can't not distress me as a pastor, I think. I have a duty. If I let the sheep just scatter, that's not good. That's not good. Neither should I have like sheepdog on every corner pushing them. You know what I mean? Like it's a real act of patience and love and trust and faith. And anyway, yeah, so the principal at St. John, he said to me yesterday, as long as he's like a cattle guy, and he goes, as long as you got them heading west, all's good. You know, just keep the crowd heading west, keep them on the move in general. And it's like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. You don't want to force people into something. No. It has to be their decision. Yeah. But you can guide them there, like you were saying. But you don't want to like just round them all up and force them to travel west, like you were saying. That's be more natural. If
someone forced you to church every Sunday, I think it would be very natural for you to have resisted. What do you think? Because you're coming here now, like regularly. And as you said, it feels natural. It would feel unnatural not to do that.
It feels natural because I've made that decision myself.
So what would have wrecked it for you? I know this is my interview, not yours, but what would have wrecked it for you? What would have made it not feel natural?
I think just human nature, when we're forced to do something, we just automatically lose interest. That's with anything in life. It's almost like your parents forcing you to eat your vegetables when you grow up. You naturally just don't want to, compared to when you get older, like I am now, a lot more conscious about my health and that. I now just naturally eat vegetables because I know it's good for me. Or when I'm young and I'm forced to eat it, I'm just like, no. Or even like the idea of like when you want something but you can't have it, you want it more.
Yep, forbidden fruit.
Exactly, 100%. You know, like the story of Adam and Eve.
Absolutely.
You know, God forbidden them from the tree of
knowledge of good and evil.
Yes, and then the serpent comes along.
Yep.
You know, this apple, eat it. They realize they're nude. God's like, why are you wearing? Well, it was only leaves, was it?
That's right.
But why you, and that because they felt vulnerable.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they realized they were naked.
Absolutely. Can I circle back to that? Because the fig leaf has become a huge theme for me just in the last very quick, very recent season in my prayer. So there's this theme in John's gospel in particular where Jesus identifies himself as the light of the world, right? And he's like, and he's God as well, obviously. And he says he comes into a darkened world to illuminate it and to bring us out of the darkness into his own wonderful light. Like this is the language of our prayers and the scriptures. But the problem, and this is what we would call sin, right? And it's what we call shame. It's like I don't want to jump the gun. But John's gospel says in a couple of ways, and John's letters as well say, the light came into the world, but the people preferred darkness because in the dark they felt safe in their sin. You know, they felt okay with their shame. It's like, oh, let's just not pretend. Let's just pretend this isn't a thing, you know. We're safer in the dark. But it's like God, you can't blind God from anything. God sees you in the light. God sees you in the dark. You're not hidden. All the dark does is give you the illusion that it lets you hide from yourself. That's it, right? So it's like we were talking about how like religion can be used as a smokescreen, which it can, because literally anything can. It's like I can take anything and use it as a fig leaf. And it's like, why are you hiding? Like your nakedness, metaphorically and otherwise, is in the image of God. It's wounded, okay, fine, we'll heal it. It's frail, okay, we'll fortify it. It's dirty, fine, we'll wash it. Like all of that is fixable. But don't cover it up because then it'll fester. And the only person who will suffer is you under the guise of that fig leaf. And it's like everything can be a fig leaf, you know, which means, okay, well, let's somehow find the courage to come out into the light and to discard of this silly disguise. Yeah.
The story of Christianity, where did it first come to light? So we start with the Old Testament.
Right.
Adam and Eve, and obviously we come towards the birth of Jesus, which is when the New Testament, well, the New Testament was about 80 AD. Or
you're right to say it's with Jesus himself. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I guess because obviously everyone was Jewish before they were Christian. Before Christ, where did the idea of God first come to light?
Great. So I've heard it said like something which is interesting about Christianity is the sacrificial dimension of our worship, right? So take the main symbol. It's like a man tortured on a cross, which looks awful, you know, like that's a horrific image. But it's a sacrificial image, which is so deep in our bones. Like we were talking about Anzac before, like everyone in their bones knows that sacrifice is hard but good. It's hard but good. If it scrimps on being hard, it's somehow less good. You know what I mean? So sacrifice is like deep in our bones, and we know it. Every parent knows what sacrifice is. It's just the most natural thing that there is. Even though we probably spend a lot of time trying to like mitigate and numb the pain side of it, which is fine. Like again, like this is like the natural stuff running its course. But okay, so Christianity is unapologetically sacrificial. It is a sacrificial religion. And nowadays that might seem quite unique. You know, you walk into a Catholic church and you see an altar and there's all this sacrificial language about a priest offering a sacrifice. And it's like, this sounds really archaic, you know, like why are we doing that? But it would not have seemed foreign at all to the ancient sensibilities, because if you look at any ancient civilization anywhere, I really mean anywhere, non-Christian, non-Jewish, they have something resembling a priest and something resembling a sacrifice where something has to be offered and there's blood involved, and it's like this vicarious, you know, something like what I want, which is basically the grace of God, is so infinitely costly that I ought not ask for it. I ought to just self-destruct instead. And so this sacrifice is a kind of ritual action that confesses, I'm nothing, I don't deserve anything, but I'm going to give up what I can in order to make a gesture of like kindness and something like that to the God who is so kind to me. You know what I mean? Every culture has a sense of that, and it's staggering that we do. Like So Christianity fulfills this very, very primal religious move that humanity is compelled to make anyway. I guess you could, I don't want to go on a tangent here, but you could say like sacrifice of that kind is almost like, it's almost like an idea that God took from us and ran with, you know what I mean? That's a bold claim to make, so I can substantiate it a bit later, but like God does give us autonomy, you know, God does make us co-authors. And that's in the first pages of Genesis. Like God creates everything, and then he creates Adam, and then he's like, hey, Adam, you name that stuff. So God takes our ideas, you know what I mean? Like God actually wants us to be involved. We're not just puppets. We're active agents of our own power, which is pretty staggering. So I think the religious pattern of Christian life is like primal, and God has like sanctified those primal needs of expressing ourselves, those primal things that we're expressing. Now, why you said why? Where did the idea of God come from? Well, that's God, this divine other. See, Christianity is you have different kinds of theism. So there's monotheism, one God. There's polytheism, many gods. There's pantheism. God is sort of everything, you know. God is the air. God is the water. God is you and me. God is just blurred across everything equally. What else? You've got atheism. There is no God. Et cetera, right? Different theisms. So Christianity is a monotheistic faith, and so is Judaism. But Christianity is interesting in the sense that we believe in a triune God. It's not polytheistic. It's not that there's three gods. There is God, but God is like relational from the beginning. You know, there was never a time when God was not a community of love within himself, Father, Son, and Spirit. Now that's a very unique claim. And you think, how could you ever come up with that? You know, like there's no reason to come up with that. And reason could not get to that conclusion. That idea of God is revealed in the person of Jesus, right? Jesus comes and shows us, I am God, but I'm God in relationship with God. Like, you know, I've come as son so that you all can enter into my filial relationship with God. So Jesus is simultaneously God, who's already in relationship with God, and he's also humanity, us, who needs to come into relationship with God again, because that relationship has been ruptured by the fall. I've gone on a tangent here, but you're asking like, where did Christianity? How did the Christian story get off the ground? It's historical in that there's a person involved. Like Jesus Christ is a historical person. Any secular scholar with their work is happy to concede that. It's like, yeah, there's a historical guy named Jesus of Nazareth, gained a following, you know, seemed to really make an impact, was publicly crucified. And that's it. That's where the secular history kind of ends. Or they would say there seems to have been some kind of a thing that followed his death, which is hard to explain. That's it. Because how can someone who doesn't believe in Jesus say, oh yeah, and historically he rose from the dead as well? It's like, that's the bit that's anomalous. That's the bit that just doesn't quite compute. It's like, no, there's got to be another reason. But what is the other reason? You know what I mean? How did Christianity carry on for even a week later if he died and was buried and that's the end of it? And those who knew him were happy to be tortured and killed, you know, publicly and never renege. yeah, like the story is either what it is. I can't think of another way that Christianity would even last 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Jesus is who he said he was.
The story of Jesus, was he born in Galilee or Nazareth?
Bethlehem.
Bethlehem, sorry, yes. And then Joseph and Mary had to go to Egypt. Was it for 2 years?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Oh, no, it might have been longer than that.
Because what tribe was it that?
Judah.
Judah.
Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah.
Yep. Because they wanted to initially kill him. Was it? When he was born and the word spread about Jesus, they initially wanted to kill Jesus. So that's why they went to Egypt. And then once the tribe was sorted out, they came back to Nazareth. And then from there, he grew up, did an apprenticeship in carpentry, and then started spreading the word of he was the son of the Father. And then eventually came to the day when he went to Jerusalem. And then that's why we have
Good Friday.
Good Friday. But the story starts on, is it Monday?
Palm Sunday?
Palm Sunday,
Palm
sorry.
Sunday. Entrance into Jerusalem, yep.
Jerusalem, yep. And then eventually gets crucified on the cross.
That's right.
And which what I came to realize recently is that's when Israel was under the influence of the Roman Empire as well. So it was actually the Romans that, would you say, that crucified Jesus?
Yeah. Because only they had the power to, like the Jews' big complaint was, we don't have the authority to sentence someone to death. So we're giving him to you, Rome. Can you kill him? And Pontius Pilate is like, what's the crime? Like, that's a serious punishment. What's he done? Oh, we wouldn't have brought you to him if he wasn't guilty. It's like, that's not an answer.
Well, didn't he get put in the jail first, and then they convinced the crowd, because I think it was I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Babylon. Babylon. I can't remember what I was reading. It was in the Bible. It was in Matthew. I was reading it recently. It was in front of a massive crowd, and they convinced the crowd to crucify Jesus over
Barabbas.
Yes, Barabbas.
Talking about Barabbas?
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. No, you're right. Yeah. So, look, one thing I'll say is that everything you just mentioned, his birth in Bethlehem, them trying to kill him, his retreat into Egypt, going to Nazareth, growing up there, his mission throughout the whole land, eventually coming to Jerusalem, his kind of joyous entry, and then in the space of not very long, he's in everyone's crosshairs. Like, all of that is drenched with foretold, like this story was foretold. And I guess it's fair to say no one really understood it going forward. But going backwards, you can see really, so it's been said that the Old Testament is hidden in the Old. Sorry, the New Testament is hidden in the Old, and the Old fulfilled in the New. So this is like the same story mirror imaging itself. And it's anticipated in the Old Testament with the prophets and everything. And it's sort of like, do you know what typology is?
No.
So typology is a way of looking at things that mean something else. They kind of foreshadow something else, right? So have you heard of us referring to Jesus as the new Adam?
No, I haven't yet.
No. So we would say that Jesus is the new Adam, the new man, and Mary is the new Eve, the new woman. And it's from the new Adam and Eve that a new humanity comes forth. So, okay, that means that Adam in Genesis is a type for Jesus, which means you look at Adam and you sort of get your bearings on his whole story and what it means. And it says something quite explicit about Jesus, and the same for Eve and Mary. But just to give one example, let's look at Adam, okay? He's like the original man. He's there, made from the clay. He is in relationship with God, like they're able to talk and commune perfectly, and he's got responsibilities. He's stewarding creation, naming the animals and taking care of the garden and whatnot. He's meant to do battle with the enemy. He's meant to dominate the serpent, which he fails at, but forget the failure in a way. That was his job, part of his job. And then how does it all, actually no, here's the failure. How does it all go topsy-turvy? He disobeys God. he has this already ruptured relationship with his spouse. Like he listens to her, but she's also already, like, they've all slid off track. Goes to the forbidden tree, eats of the fruit. His eyes are open. He reveals himself to be totally vulnerable and naked. And now he's dying. Like, you know, God says, "In the day that you eat it, surely you will die." So he's dying. And he's an outcast. And the garden becomes a desert. Like, everything's gone. Now zoom forward to Jesus, a kind of new original man. He is baptized, you know, in the Jordan. He is naming the created order, like he's renaming stuff. He gives Simon a new name, Peter. Like, I'm drawing links that aren't necessarily so explicit, but I'm just thinking, like, you could name so many correlations between Jesus and Adam of stuff that should have gone right that went wrong, and Jesus is redoing it right again. And then eventually he goes into, let's say, the desert of Jerusalem, you know, this dead, barren place, even though it's the center of their religious life and it's teeming with kind of corporate well-being. There's a cross there, you know, just outside the walls. And Jesus goes upon the cross and dies, the scriptures say, on a tree. You know, they hung him on a tree, even though it's a cross. So it's like, now Jesus, the new man, has become the new fruit of this new tree, and the new humanity is not forbidden to partake of that tree, but is obliged now to partake of that tree for life, eternal life. You partake of it, you don't die, you live, you come to life, in fact. Now, that's just one correlation of, like, Adam and Jesus. You could do the same thing with Noah. You could do the same thing with David. You could do the same thing with Jeremiah and the prophets. And it's like everything in the Old Testament points squarely to Jesus Christ. He fulfills everything. So when you kind of skimmed over his history from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, it's like, man, there's a million points of connection there and reasons why it happened that way. So this is my concept of some of our basic theology of God being God and us not being God, but being made in the image and likeness of God, being made for a relationship with God. But there is a distinction between God and God's creation. There is a distinction between creator and creation. And the church uses this word substance, which is a very technical kind of scientific-y kind of word. And you'd hear it in the Nicene Creed, where we say, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. I've said the apostles, but the bit that matters is where it says, Jesus is God from God, light from light, true God from true God, consubstantial with the Father, right? Now, this is important because we're making, the church at Nicaea in 325 is making this important distinction of what Jesus is. Now, Jesus is a man who was born of Mary, like a human birth of a human woman. He's fully substantially human. He has the substance of humanity. But he's also fully God, right? Not just like a third of God got sent down from heaven, not just a perfect replica of God, not like a hologram. God. Everything that is God is in Jesus exclusively. So the substance of Jesus is God. And the word, the theological doctrinal word that we use is hypostasis, hypostatically fully one and fully the other, which sort of shouldn't, like that kind of boggles the mind, because it's like, imagine something that's absolutely hot and absolutely cold at the same time. It's like, yeah, but doesn't one cancel the other? No. In Jesus, his because they're not, as Bishop Barron often says, they're not in competition with each other. Like, God is everywhere, right? But I don't have to say, hey, God, can you move over so I can sit on this chair? He's not in competition with me. I can cohabitate where he is because I'm not the same substance as him, So one just nestles into the other, like seamlessly, because they're made for each other. They're made for relationship, right? So anyway, that's a bit about Jesus and his full humanity and divinity. But I want to distinguish the point that, and I think it's helpful to think of it in terms of colors, right? So imagine you've got God, and for the sake of distinguishing what God is, let's say God is like this blue substance, right? There's just this like blue stuff everywhere. And then, and that God, as we know, is a God of love. God's not like alone. He's not like, oh, I'm bored, I should create some people. No, God is utterly happy and at peace and content and fulfilled, everything. God is fine and dandy, just as he is. But out of that gratuitous love, God desires for there to be an other with whom God can share the wonder of his being, you know? So God desires that someone who is not God would enjoy him because he's enjoyable. Like he's so good, right? Now notice that's absolutely gratuitous. Like it's hard for us to get that because there are other theologies, let's say, where God has created humanity to be his slaves. You know, he needs workers and here they are. Or God has created humanity for entertainment. He's bored and he just wants to watch a bit of a drama. All that's such an offense to who God is. God gains nothing from us except us. See what I'm saying? It's purely gratuitous. It's like, you know, what does a parent gain from their kid? The kid. That's it. There's no ulterior motive. It's not like, we're bored, we should raise a kid and just see how that story unravels. No, it's gratuitous. The kid is their own, and he or she should exist for his own pleasure. And that pleasure will be fulfilled with us in the family, right? So God's like that, purely gratuitous. So here's this blue substance, utterly sufficient and whatnot, and out of a gratuitous act of love creates a different substance, which is not God, right? It's something else. Creator, blue, creation. And let's, for the sake of distinguishing, let's say the creation's pink, you know? Now, all things going well, they should have just embraced. Like in their otherness, they should have just embraced in love. But this is where the Adam and Eve story kind of throws a pretty sad spanner in the work, where that pink substance, which is the created order, you know, it's like stars and galaxies and whatnot, and it's animals and things, and it's, who knows, quantum physics, and it's also humanity as a particular part to play in that pink matter. So now this blue substance has to sort of swoon the pink substance back to itself, which is the story of salvation. And how does God do that? Because, let's say, because this thing isn't God, it's lacking in so many of the things that God can do. So it's like a blind, deaf, mute substance now, you know, like it's, the more it departs, the more it's just ending itself. So God has to swoon it back to himself. And he does that by revelation. Like he does that by revealing himself in a number of ways. He's somehow implanting a desire for blue within the pink, you know. And then he's communicating himself by, let's say, the prophets and the intrinsic goodness of the universe and whatever else. And then by the incarnation, the blue takes the flesh of the pink, right? And that's Jesus. So when Jesus arrives on the scene, he's like, here's the blue and here's the pink in the pink world. But Jesus is a unique entity, let's say, in the pink world, because he's fully pink. He's like fully native. It's like, yeah, we get him, you know, we got it. But he's also fully blue, kind of at the same time. He is what we should have been, the embracing of pink and blue, right? And it's worth highlighting at this point. Jesus isn't like purple, right? He's not the mixture of pink and blue. Oh yeah, you know, this kind of mixed up substance. No, they can't mix. They don't mix. They embrace. They come they come smack bang and lock into each other, but they don't become a new substance. The substance is God and creation. The substances, two substances of God and creation. Is that making sense?
Yep.
I think it's such a helpful image for me, at least, to come to terms with what's going on here. And therefore, our whole journey as like the big, vast pink out there is to come and like be married, so to speak, as fully as possible to the blue, where like I'm so at home with God. I'm so like given over to God. I don't get burnt up. Like I don't disappear. It's not like the blue consumes the pink, just like the burning bush, you know, the fire is on the burning bush and the bush is not harmed, but the fire is fully present and the bush is fully present. So God doesn't like crush us when he comes upon us. There's this peaceable cohabitation of God and creation in right relationship. That's what's happening. That's the story of salvation, really. The blue calling all of the pink back to itself, and that which responds comes back. And that which doesn't, well, I suppose, without going down a different tangent here, I guess that's the definition of hell. You know, pink without blue is hell. It's destined for ruin. It can't possibly. How could it live? How could it have joy if God is what joy is? How could it have freedom if freedom is God's gift? You know what I mean? Like everything that is blue and everything that's even reminiscent of blue is no longer available. That's awful. Yeah, it's like unimaginable.
Unfortunately, I have to let you go, brother. You got things to do for the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. Definitely have to do a part 2.
I'm keen.
100%. There's so much more to explore. Like Christianity is just such a big subject, I can guess. Yep. It's such a deep rabbit hole, and there's so many paths you can go down and talk about. Mm-hmm. And I definitely want to talk about the history of Christianity because it's 2,000 years old now. Sure. And definitely what I want to touch on is like just the power and the empires that were built off Christianity and grew from it just because of faith and values. It's something, I definitely want to go into more detail with you for sure. But I appreciate your time today.
Awesome, thank you.
And definitely have to arrange that.
All right, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
Champion.